Hey, folks, you're listening to the Jobs Podcast. I am your host, Tim Hendricks. As always, we get right to it. We don't want to waste your time. Today, we have Tara with us. She's got a cool job. She is a flight nurse on life flight choppers, and I have been wanting to interview somebody in this line of work for quite a while. So I will apologize for the listeners. We've got a toad strangler of a rainstorm right now. There's thunder and lightning and everything. So if you hear anything in the background, I can't control Mother Nature. So that's what it is. But Tara, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and get started like we always do. Give us a snapshot of your origin story, so to speak, where you were born, your early upbringing, all that good stuff.
Sounds good. I was born in Monett, Missouri, so kind of around your neck of the woods.
Yeah.
After I went to Monett High School, obviously, I did a health occupations class at our career center in Monett to kind of get me ready. So basically, right out of high school, I worked at Cox South as a CNA. So I did that while going to nursing school. I graduated nursing school in 2019, and I've been a nurse ever since. I started flying in 2021 to 2022, and I've loved every second of it.
So you knew, when you were rather young, you knew what you wanted to do.
Me and my sister both. My sister's also, she's a travel nurse. We've known ever since we were little, itty bitty. Kind of started out when my sister, when she was 3, she had a brain tumor in her cerebellum and she had a large portion of her cerebellum taken out. And, she was always fascinated with the doctor. She was in and out constantly. And, I think just kind of from that, obviously I'm younger, so I didn't get to see any of that part of her life, but just knowing that she wouldn't be here today without the doctors and the nurses and the CNAs and, everybody that took care of her, she wouldn't be here today. So I think that kind of, we don't have any medical people on my direct side of the family. So it's just us two in the medical side. So that's kind of why we decided to do it. And I've always known I wanted to do flight nursing. Well, I say always, like starting in high school when we really started narrowing down kind of like what I wanted to do, we had a flight nurse come talk to us in our health occupations class. And I thought it was the coolest thing. And I was like, okay, I have to do that.
What was it when she was doing her presentation? Was it the flight mostly, or it was
I think it was just the excitement and, every day is different. You're always learning. I love that constant learning environment. Everything's always changing and, there's no 2 days that are the same. And I thought that would be something that's right up my alley. I don't like the monotony of doing the same thing every single day. I could never do a desk job. I've always said that, but
yes.
Yeah, I think
I'm the same
ever
way.
since then, Mercy, I fly for Mercy Lifeline. They have a program that's called the SOAR program. So once you graduate high school, you have to be at least 18. You can ride along with them as long as you're going in a track. I think we even let like police officers ride with us too. But firefighters, EMTs, paramedics, nurses, CNAs, they let them ride with us. So I did that right out of high school, like right when I turned 18. So I flew with Lifeline 1, which is in Branson. And ever since, because I was like, you know what? I say I want to do this, but maybe I should get in a helicopter and make sure like I can do this. Preface this.
Had you ever flown?
Well, I've flown in, fixed wings, but I had never flown in a helicopter before. So it's very, very, very different.
Okay.
I will say it's very different feeling. You feel the bumps a lot more in a helicopter, I feel like, than you do in a fixed wing, for sure. There's a lot more of them too, because we fly a lot lower. But yeah, it was just as soon as I got in there and started flying, I was like, I have to do this. I have to do this. So
what was that first flight? How long were you in the air? How was it? Did you, I guess, lean into it and think this is exactly what I was expecting it to be? Or were you surprised when you got up in the air in a helicopter for the first time?
I think I was a little bit surprised. I thought it would be a little bit more scary, I think. Just because it's so open, you can see everything when you're in the front.
Right.
So I thought it'd be a little bit more scary, but it's really not. I thought I'd get more nauseous. I have a very nauseous stomach. So don't let that, if you're out there and you're like, oh, I can never, I get super car sick. So do I. I just take Zofran right before I go if it's going to be a bumpy day, but it works out. And, there are days that we throw up and it's not a big deal. It happens. A lot of my partners do it as well. So don't let that deter you. But, I thought I'd get really nauseous and it really wasn't that bad. We went on a scene call, picked up somebody from the ambulance that was already intubated and I'd kind of gotten to know the crew a little bit because I had done some short flights with them in the area before we took my first patient. My first 2 days that I flew with them, I didn't get anything.
Hmm.
And that's just kind of, they called me the white cloud. They loved
Yeah.
having me because they didn't do anything all day when I came. But when we finally got the first patient, they were like, "Oh, you can bag them on the way into the aircraft if you want, you know." And I was
Hmm.
like, yeah." So they were, the crews were just, I think they made the experience even better. They
Yeah.
involved you. They wanted to know who you were. It's kind of like a mini job interview prior to, actually having your real job interview, kind of like test the waters. And we've contemplated doing something like that where we have a program where people can fly with us more regularly if they're thinking about taking this path. And I think that would be really cool for people to see what it's like and for us to get to know you too, to make sure it's a good fit.
You probably need to find people like you are. I can tell already you're a go-getter. You wanted to, if they gave you the opportunity to do something, you are going to jump in there and do it. And you can't be a wallflower in that line of
No,
work,
you
I wouldn't
can't.
imagine.
You definitely can't. It is a detriment to it. You can't be scared to do things. And I will say, being a nurse as opposed to being the medic, I am a lot more cautious in that aspect of like, do I tube this patient or do I wait it out? Because, in the hospital, it's more of like, we're going to let this ride as long as possible, least invasive methods first. And
Sure.
I feel like, medics, they take it from the standpoint of like, well, if they need it, they need it. Why would we wait? So it took a little bit to get used to that. But I still am a lot more cautious than a lot of the medics and even some of my nurse friends too. So I am a go-getter, but I also like try to take back a little bit, and
Sure.
it makes a good mix. But
More methodical, maybe.
yes, yeah, I think
Okay.
about things very, very thoroughly in my head first. Maybe it's ADHD, but
I have one question about, getting, I guess, car sick or air sick. That is something that wasn't even on my radar, but I can see that it's not as smooth of a ride as a plane. It's going to be a little more bumpy and all over the place. Now, do you just have like a bag?
yeah. So it
Okay.
kind of depends on the day. We
Okay.
look at the winds and stuff. Like if it's super windy on the ground, it's going to be really windy up in the air. But
All right.
even then, sometimes the pilots, they're amazingly smart. They can find what altitude to fly where there's not a crosswind. Usually, when you get those crosswinds, is when it gets really bumpy and it hits you, and you're going up and down and back and forth, and
Hmm.
just the different changes in pressure too will make you drop lower and then come back up. So I kind of lean on them too. Like if they tell me, yeah, it's going to be rough out there, you can usually tell just by walking outside. Like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
going to be a rough day.
Hmm.
I'll usually just take my medication beforehand. Usually once you get in the aircraft, if Zofran's all you got, it's probably not going to work. You're just going to throw up and it'll be fine. But I've had calls where me and my partner both have gotten sick. It's usually worse when it's hot. You get even
Oh,
the slightest bit warm in the back of that aircraft, and you're done on a bumpy day. There's no saving it. But we have just the same as we would give a patient, or if we take a parent rider with us up front, we have little barf bags, basically like what you would have in the ER that we
you're
use.
you're not hanging your head out that little window.
No.
So let's jump into, I want to talk more about what your day to day is like and what it's like when you actually go on a call and when you land in remote places and stuff like that. But let's talk about your education. Now, you had mentioned that you were pretty set early on
Yeah.
with that initial exposure from a professional that came and visited your school, which, side note, anybody listening, you have a lot of people that go to schools with different careers. You're a perfect example, Tara, of that seed was planted, and
Mhm.
that's how you recruit. So
Yeah, exactly. It really is. And if there's anybody out there that's like, man, it'd be really cool if you come talk to my class, feel free to reach out to Mercy Lifeline. We'd love to come out there and
cool.
talk to you guys and tell you about our job.
So your education, you graduated from high school, you knew what you wanted to do, you did some ride-alongs. Now what?
So knowing what I wanted to do really helped because I had to focus in on what kind of certifications I would need, and also doing the SOAR program and talking to the nurses and the medics and knowing what I needed and what would be helpful and what wasn't helpful was super nice. At Mercy, you have to have minimum 3 years of nurse experience, and it has to be in an ER or an ICU. Um, we're kind of leaning more towards ICU as opposed to ER, but we'll still take ER nurses. They are still incredibly smart, and they're still a valuable tool to have. They just don't take care of some of the, somebody on 5 pressors and somebody
Yeah.
that's on a balloon pump or an Impella and things like that. ICP monitors. they don't get those things. So I think in some ways we're leaning more towards ICU, but we'll still take ER as well. So you have to have 3 years there. I believe that air care, it's 4 now. It used to be 5 years, but they dropped it back to 4. So anywhere from 3 to 5, but 3 is the absolute minimum. And I will say, even at 3 years experience as a nurse, you're kind of getting comfortable where you're at. It's still very new to go into flight. So I would err on the side of like maybe start around 4 years, even 5, just to make sure you're comfortable and you're competent. Because you don't have the backup like you do in the hospital when you put the code button on and you've got 10 people that immediately run into your room. It's not like that in flight.
Yeah.
It's just you and your partner. But
right.
So you have to have those years of experience. You have to have a critical care certification. That could be your CEN, your certified emergency nurse, your certified critical care nurse. But CAMES has actually come out to say, which is our accrediting body, that you have to have your certified flight registered nurse. So I got my CFRN last year. I believe Mercy is doing within 6 months of hire now, because it is a requirement of CAMES. So I still highly recommend getting your CCRN first to make sure that you have a good base knowledge, because the CFRN is not for the faint of heart. It was very difficult. But that is a requirement within the first 6 months to a year of hire, is getting your CFRN. There's multiple different certifications. Like you have to have ACLS, which is your adult cardiac life support. You have to have your basic life support. You have to have your PALS, which is your pediatrics. You have to have neonatal resuscitation. You have to have some sort of trauma course, be that like the TNCC or Lifeline. When we do our trauma day, we do a trauma course then as well. It could be, you could sit in on ATLS, which is generally just for advanced providers, so like nurse practitioners and doctors. But you can take it as an auditor and still kind of get credit for it. You just don't get the actual cert for it, but that counts for Mercy Lifeline. You have to take basic hazmat. They would like us to take, and I took the vehicle rescue technician course, and I highly recommend taking that as well. I think it just gives you a better, especially from a nurse standpoint, when we don't do scene calls, it gives you a much better idea of scene safety when it comes to car accidents. And also being able to take a step back and be like, oh, I don't know if that crib's going to hold. Like having a better understanding is never a bad thing. And there's so much. As a nurse, you're not required to have your medic. And we are a little bit different at Mercy because we also service Arkansas, because we have 4 bases. We have a base in Rogers, and then we have a base in Fort Smith. So those bases, if you are a nurse, you have to have your EMT as well in Arkansas.
Okay.
So the caveat with our Missouri base up at St. Robert, where I work, we don't need it because we don't service Arkansas necessarily. But if you work at Lifeline 1 in Branson, you service Arkansas, so you also have to have your EMT. So I think they kind of just prefer that everyone have their EMT if possible. I don't know necessarily how Air Care does it, because I'm sure being in Springfield, they service Northwest Arkansas quite a bit. But kind of would be something that I would talk to them about if it's something you need to get. But I highly recommend, if you're a nurse, getting your paramedic. They have the RN to medic bridge programs out there. It's definitely not the same as going through a paramedic course. You definitely don't learn everything like they do. But I think it's good to get your hands on intubations and different skills that you wouldn't do, like crikes and stuff like that you wouldn't do as a nurse. And just, again, having that knowledge and having the ride along time on the ground for the scene safety and knowing what it's like just having 2 people. So I highly recommend getting that as well if you're a nurse.
One question, and the pathway from the beginning to where you're at, do you find a lot of people go straight to nurse and then flight nurse, or do you have folks that they start as a paramedic, maybe they run on an ambulance, they do that for a while, and then they transition into going after your line of work? Is there one particular pathway, or are those the 2 that you see?
I've seen both of those done. We actually have a couple at Lifeline 1 that they were medics. They were ground medics for a couple years. They decided to fly. They've done flying for a while, and now they're like, okay, now I want to make more money. Let's go back and get my RN license. So they'll go back, get their RN license, but you have to complete 1,000 hours in an ICU. I think it's a minimum of 1,000. I could be wrong on that, so don't quote me on that. But you have to complete a certain amount of time as an ICU or ER nurse before they can consider you ready for flight.
Okay.
So even though you've been flying as a medic and we do the same job, it is whether you're the medic or the nurse. At Lifeline, at least, I can't speak for other programs like AirEvac, but at Lifeline, we swap who's lead provider each way, and one person's tasking while the other person's leading the call, and then we switch the next call. So you are doing the same job, whether you are the nurse or the medic. It's just, unfortunately, the nurses get paid a pretty decent amount more than the medics do. So that's why it entices a lot of them to go back to get their RN. But you do have to complete your time in an ER or ICU setting before you can be paid as a nurse.
Now, one thing you just mentioned there, let's jump into your crew makeup. You obviously have a pilot, a single pilot, I would assume, and then you have a nurse and then a medic. So you'll have 3 on board, which leaves room for how many patients can you typically take? Just one?
So we take 1. Now, we do have the capability of taking 2. We do have a second stretcher that we leave at the base. So if it was a mass casualty incident, we could take 2 patients and each of us would take care of 1. I have not seen that done, and I don't know if anyone that I work with currently that has ever done that, other than maybe one of the medics that used to work in San Antonio in Colorado. So it's not been done at our base since I've been there, but it is possible to take 2 patients.
It seems like stuff would have to hit the fan for you to have a second
Yeah,
person.
I think it'd be one of those things of like, and we would also have to get approval from our director, like, hey, we're going to this mass casualty, we're going to put the second stretcher in. But it's a big ordeal because we have a lot of equipment that we'd have to take out. We have to take the other seat out and put it up. So it's a lot of movement for that to happen.
Are you, obviously there's a weight limit, but what kind of leeway do you have as far as, I mean, do you typically hire folks that are petite?
So, so we recently started reinforcing this. We have a 250-pound weight limit for crew. So in all your gear, you have to weigh less than 250. And we brought back our fitness test as well. We just completed that about a month and a half ago, I think. At this point, it was like end of February. So we have a fitness test that we have to pass as well. And it's not punitive. So it's not like you just have to be passing with a certain percentage or show improvement from your last. They're not going to fire you if you don't pass it. But it does give them at least a baseline of where you're at and making sure that you can at least perform most duties of the job. Obviously, someone like me that's 5'1" and 125 pounds, like I'm not going to be able to lift that stretcher because we have our own stretcher that loads into the back of the aircraft. I'm not going to be able to do that by myself if the patient weighs 400 pounds. That's just not physically possible. But that's why there's 2 of us. So I think it just gives them a benchmark of like, could they perform most of the duties? Yes. And also, if you get hurt at work, you have to return to that baseline too.
What would your fitness test, can you give me a quick little snapshot of what that looks like?
Yeah, so we did there's a bunch of mobility stuff too, especially with your neck and your hips. So there's a big mobility portion, which thankfully do yoga. So I'm pretty good on that. So I got pretty good scores there. But we took the deadlifts out because everyone was passing the deadlifts pretty good previous year. But we do a farmer's walk. We do a little ruck with a weight sack on. We do sled push pulls, and then they have this new little bar that you like pull up on, kind of like you're in a deadlift position, but it just measures your pulling force essentially.
Oh, okay.
So just kind of those basic things. There is a lot of cardio with that. Like it doesn't sound like it saying it out loud, but you're doing all of those things back to back to back with like a minute break in between. So towards the end of it, when you're getting to that rep where you have to lift that sack on the back of your back and run with it, it gets pretty tough.
Is it for time or is it just a completion?
It's just a completion.
Okay.
You have to do it it's a completion per like their time frame. Some of them are timed and some of them are based off rep.
Oh, I see. Okay. So your education, you have gotten all of the education that you got. All of the different training. I'm not even going to try and remember all those acronyms because I won't remember it at all. So you finished it. How does it work as far as, do you have to complete all of that before you can actually start working on, or I know there were some hours you had to get in the ICU and then you can get like a job, I'm working and earning my education at the same time?
So that's only for the medics. The medics can keep their medic spot while they're going to nursing school or
Okay.
while they're finishing up their hours. So they can stay a medic, but they don't get paid as a nurse or take one of the nurse positions until they've met their hourly requirement. You don't for nurses, you don't have to have, like I said, you don't have to have the CFRN. And I think they give you 6 months to a year. I think it's somewhere around there. Now they did change it because Kames made it a requirement. So they might have dropped it from a year to 6 months. I already had mine, so I didn't worry about it, but you have to have that within 6 months of hire. And then the neonatal resuscitation you have to have within 6 months of hire. They don't make you have that prior to. And then hazmat, you don't have to have the incident command stuff, like the ICS 100 and 200, you don't have to have until 6 months. And a lot of that stuff they kind of build into our orientation. So they let you know, like, hey, just go complete this online FEMA class. So it's not hard. It's just work that has to be done. But some of that stuff is like you have to have it within 6 months of hire. But like your ACLS and your BLS and your PALS, those are you have to have prior to. But working in an ICU or the ER, you should already have those things.
I'm sure that there's a variance depending on the individual that's trying to achieve the goal of doing what you do. But is there a general time frame as far as like nursing school is this long and then this kind of stuff takes, I mean, do most folks take 3, 4, 5 years to get from point A? Okay. All right.
Yeah. I would say minimum. Nursing school between graduating in 2019. So, 5, 6 years probably I'd say is about average from graduating high school.
Okay. So it's not just, I'm going to go do this. You really got to be determined because
you have to keep at it. And I applied right when I was like maybe a couple months shy of the 3 years just to kind of feel the waters and like see what they were expecting and, see what I could do to improve before it's time for me to get hired. And, obviously I got turned down because I didn't have the yearly requirement, but it was super helpful to be like, oh, you should make sure you go have your NRP. That way you don't have to worry about that and like go do your hazmat. So some of that stuff I did prior to, but because I applied a little bit early, just because I wanted to see kind of where it was at.
Is there a minimum age that you have to be in order to be a nurse as far as, most folks probably aren't going to complete the training before the age of 21.
No, I wouldn't think before. I think we might have some that are 20, maybe. Because, you can graduate high school with basically almost an associate's degree now. So it's kind of wild, the things that you can do in high school. But I don't honestly know if I would say 18 is the minimum, the absolute minimum, because that's what it is to work in the hospital. So
okay.
I highly doubt that they would hire anybody that young. That's very, might need a few more years to mature from that, but
get some experience.
Right.
What is the shift that you work? Are you on like a 24 or a 12 or a 10 or are you on 24?
So we do 2 24s a week. And we kind of have a rotating schedule. I know a lot of programs out there do like you do this many days on, then you have this many days off. But ours is just a rotating schedule. Mine repeats every 5 weeks. So just 2 days a week. You can work up to 36 hours in a row, but you have to have 8 hours off in between one shift to the next. So you can work 36 and then have 8 hours and then come back.
So, in the fire service that I've made a career in, we work a 24-hour shift typically, and we come in the morning, everybody gets their coffee, and then we start checking off all the equipment and talking about what the day, and walk us through what an average shift would be in your line of work.
Yeah, absolutely. So we get in, our shift starts at 8. So we usually arrive about 10 minutes early. Some are 5 to 10 minutes early. Kind of talk with the crew about the happenings from the previous shift. We always ask them how many calls they received and how many were completed. Because, we turn things down for different reasons, or maybe they had one they were on standby for and got canceled, things like that. So we get that information from them. We ask them if there were any issues with anything, comms, equipment, anything like that. Any aircraft issues, if they're doing any pilot training that day, if there are going to be any scheduled like downtime for scheduled maintenance, things like that on the aircraft. Then once they leave, we clock in and we have an ops brief. So we put in who's on duty for the day, their phone numbers to be contacted if our Mercy Comm has issues or needs to call us for any reason. We put who the pilot on duty is. who the mechanic on duty is. And then the same kind of information, if there's any mid-shift crew changes, because sometimes we'll have people come in at 12 hours. They have other things that need to do. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll put our weather code. So red for weather means we're not going anywhere like today. There's, thunderstorms, convective thunderstorms out there. So we're not going anywhere. We're red for weather. Or we're yellow. Yeah, we could probably go somewhere. It kind of depends where. So you'll have to check with the pilot. And then green means we're pretty much good to go anywhere. And then, so those are our weather codes. And then you just put if there's any scheduled maintenance or pilot training. And this is sent to MercyCom and our leaders so that everyone knows what's going on at our crew for the day, since we have 4 bases. And then we start out with a fatigue score. So this is what kind of helps us throughout the day, kind of gauge how tired we are. It's a very good safety measure for us. It starts with how much sleep you got the previous night, how many years you've been doing it. And then you do the temperature outside, if it's super hot or super cold, that affects that. Turbulence, which you wouldn't necessarily know unless you've already flown. So that's usually blank until we go somewhere. Hours on duty, you have the amount of sleep you've had during the shift. So say we take a nap every 2 hours, it's -1 point. So those are kind of the things that go into the fatigue. And then there's also a little section on there that's just for illness, stress, or other. So say you kind of have a head cold, you can put a 1 on that just to give, a little bit of, or say you haven't eaten all shift, you could put 2 there. Like, hey, I need a little bit of time to eat something. Things like that. And then transport time. That's the other big one. So if you did a 6-hour transport, that's going to bump up your time quite a bit. Once we hit a score of 20, we have to go down for 4-hour nap. And MercyCom is not allowed to call us for 4 hours. So we're completely out of service for 4 hours, and then we go back up when that 4 hours is up. So we fill out all that. Once we do that, we go back and we check the fridge temps. So we have a medication refrigerator that has some medications in it. We just make sure it's within range. We check our freezer that has our cooler packs in it for our blood, because we carry blood on our aircraft. And then we check the blood fridge. So we look at all of the blood products, make sure the temperature indicators are okay, check the temperature of that refrigerator. On Mondays, we change the discs too. So we can send them to the blood bank to show that, it was within range. And then we go out and we check the aircraft. So we check all of our equipment, make sure that everything was restocked appropriately, make sure we have everything we need. We check our O2 on board, make sure we've got enough of that. We do just a quick rundown of the aircraft, make sure nothing looks out of place to us. And then we go back inside. There's a tone test at 8:45. So that's just MercyCom paging both of us out to make sure all of our radios are working. We each respond individually with our numbers, just so that they know everyone's accounted for and their radios are working. And then we have our huddle at 9 a.m. At 9 a.m., we talk about each of the 4 bases. We also have a kids team as well. So the kids team comes on. They say they've had any transport in the last 24 to 48. Any issues on their side. Then comms comes on, and they'll tell us if there's any diversions in the area, like PICU divert, NICU divert, no IR at this place. So we kind of know the happenings of the hospitals. Generally speaking, it matters to us, but it doesn't really matter, because if it's a TCD, we're going to bring it wherever's closest anyways. But we do try to keep in mind, like if somebody is on ICU divert, we're going to try really hard to not take a scene call, like, because we have Cox and Mercy at Springfield. So maybe if Mercy's on ICU divert, we would bring it to Cox South, which they would tell us in the air as well. But it's just something good to know in the mornings. And if there's no coverage in a certain area, like, oh, there's no neurosurgery coverage here, then we're not going to take head injury there.
What's your coverage like, as far as you had mentioned that there's different locations where I'm assuming they overlap a little bit, but
yes.
How far out can you travel? Are you going we don't go more than 2.5 or 3 hours in each direction, or I'm just making up numbers, but
no, you're totally fine. So in the St. Robert area, we typically fly our scene calls either to Mercy Springfield or Cox South. Generally Mercy Springfield, just because we are Mercy, and a lot of the people in the area go to Mercy Lebanon, so they have Mercy providers.
Okay.
But we will go to Cox as well. It's not to say that we won't, and I have taken scene calls there. Interfacilities are a bit of a different story, because we will go wherever the accepting physician is. So we will go to St. Louis. And also, if it's a scene call that's a pediatric patient, up where we are, it's not uncommon. I've gone a couple times to like Mercy Children's or, somewhere that has, or like, Creve Coeur has children's capability. That's just a little bit better than Springfield, or there's Cardinal Glennon in St. Louis. So there's different areas that we can go that if it was a pediatric, we might go up north, even though it's a little bit further. It's not technically the closest. It's the most appropriate location for them to go. But yeah, most of the time we're going to bring them back to Springfield, but we will go to Barnes. We'll go to Kansas City. We've taken people to Memphis before. I have not personally done that, but I know that crews have. If you're over further east, like Shannon County or Cape Girardeau, that's actually not that far to go to Memphis. But so yeah, we'll pretty much go wherever they tell us to. We may have to stop a couple times to refuel, but
I'm trying to remember, does Springfield, both Cox and Mercy are level 1 trauma,
everything.
Is that correct?
Yeah, they're both level 1 trauma, stroke, and STEMI currently. For a while, Mercy was a level 2 stroke, but they have just recently reinstated the level 1. So they are both level 1 everything, so we can take them to either place. It's patient preference at that point.
Are you taking, you mentioned Fort Smith and down in Arkansas. Do they have level 1 down there, or are you going to go to Springfield or up to like Kansas City or St. Louis if you needed a level 1?
For scene calls, they take most of theirs to Mercy Springfield, I do believe.
Okay.
There's not a ton of trauma centers there. I think they have a pretty decent children's capability in Arkansas, and I haven't flown down there yet, so I'm not a huge expert on their area, but I do feel like I see them most of the time coming back to Springfield with their stuff. Sometimes I'll take them to Mercy, Fort Smith, but I feel like a lot of times they do end up just flying them to Springfield.
Do you have the same crew most of your shifts, or are you constantly working with different people?
So it depends on who you are. So me personally, I work with pretty much every medic that we have, just the way my rotation works. But I do have 2 partners that are my main partners, Luke and Gary. So it's kind of nice because you get to know everybody a little bit, and I get to see how everyone does things. But sometimes it's like, oh yeah, they like to do things this way. So it can be a little confusing. It is nice when you have like one main partner, but I do kind of like flying with it.
I can see the benefit, though, of having the same 1 or 2 people because you know their mannerisms, what they're going to reach for, and the continuity is really nice.
Yeah. You don't even have to speak, and they already know what you want.
Yep.
But I feel like we've been working together long enough, all of my partners, that I still we already know that we've gotten used to each other, so it's not as big of a deal.
What areas, if any, of specialization do you have when you reach the flight nurse level? Is there anywhere else to go? I mean, I guess you could go be a pilot or something, but you're at the pinnacle, aren't you?
Yeah, I really feel like you are. I've seen a lot of people go back to nurse practitioner school because you make a little more money, but you really don't do anything more than what we do. I've seen people go to CRNA school, but again, you don't really do anything differently other than placing art lines and epidurals that you wouldn't do as a flight nurse. So I think for some people, if you're looking for increased pay, your options are nurse practitioner route or the CRNA route.
I have spent a fair amount of time in the back of an ambulance, especially when you're a rookie in the fire service. You usually, if the box needs a rider, then, on a call, they'll send the rookie, And so I've spent a fair amount of time in the back of those things going down the highway. They're bouncing all over the place, and it's impossible to do anything, especially start a line or whatever. How is it, or do you do most of your work like that on the ground before you lift off, or is it just you're doing a lot of that stuff, we need to get going, and so everything is en route?
Yeah, so at Mercy, at least, I know there are some that will do a lot of their stuff on the ground. Our goal is to be in and out as quick as we can. Now, that's not to say that we won't sit down and take our time on things that need it. There are things that can't be left unattended. Your life-saving ABCs, I'm not going to leave an airway unattended if they're not able to maintain their own airway. Now, if it's something where it's a COPD or they're going to wear out eventually, I may wait till we get to the aircraft. I'm more comfortable with my equipment. I have all of my stuff. We typically don't bring a ton of stuff out of the aircraft because it's quicker in and out if you don't bring a ton of stuff. We'll bring the monitor if it's appropriate. We'll bring the vent if they need it. But other than that, we bring the minimum amount necessary because we don't want to be bogged down by trying to grab or leave equipment on scene. Our goal is to be on scene less than 10 minutes
Oh,
for just regular scene calls and less than 20 minutes for inter-facility transfers. And I feel like most of the time we meet that requirement. With some of the traumas, it can be kind of hard, say you get on scene and they're hypotensive and tachycardic and you need to intubate, but you can't because their pressure is not good enough. You have to, resuscitate them first. So that's going to take a little bit of time, but, whether that's just some fluids or if you have to get blood, pressors. So there are some things that warrant you being on scene for a little bit longer, but especially with those traumas, that golden hour, us being on scene or even in the air, we're not fixing them. We are a
yeah.
Band-Aid getting them to the place that can fix them. We are not an OR. We can't fix their problem. So our goal is to get in and out as quick as and safely as possible for the patient.
What is or do you have a benchmark when, let's say you're at the hospital and then I don't know if you get tones or a call comes in, do you have a certain number of minutes where it's like, okay, time to get to work. We have 5 minutes, 6 minutes. Like, I don't even know how long it takes to fire up the helicopter and all that.
So ours actually fires up pretty quick. Some of them are a little bit slower. We at our base have a hangar. So on average, if it's in the hangar, like on days like today, we'd keep it in there. If it's super hot or super cold, we'll keep it in the hangar. It takes us 6 minutes to open up the hangar doors, pull it out, and get lifted.
Good grief.
Yeah, it's pretty quick. So
You're
we
moving.
like to be 10 minutes or less. That's again, our lift times are 10 minutes or less. That's our goal. It's something we track after every call that we do. We put in how long it took us to do all these things. So it takes us like on average 6-7 minutes to get it out of the hangar and lift. Now, if it's already out, we could be in the air in less than 5 minutes.
Wow.
Kind of depends on who the pilot is. And, some of our pilots are really quick and they're out there before I even have my helmet and stuff and any of my gear. But we sit in our flight suits most of the day and our boots on and we're ready to go.
What is the typical call? I mean, are you landing a lot of times on like Highway 44 or are you doing?
We prefer to land at we have designated LZs and the crews in the area are really good about finding those LZs. It's just safer. During the day, it's not that big of a deal. But they have to shut down the road for us to land there. And it's kind of a pain for PD and sheriffs and the highway patrol to shut down a road for that amount of time. Generally, if we're landing on the road, it's because they were going to be shut down anyways. So it's not as big of a deal. But and I don't mind landing on 44. It's actually kind of nice when you land on 44. It's when you get in those areas where they're super wooded, being up there, we have a bunch of horse trails and stuff, and it can be hard to land with a bunch of trees and wires. And that's why we try to go to designated LZs. Now, if we lift and we figure out like, hey, they're still on scene, it's not super far, we may circle around the scene and see if there's anywhere else that we could land. And if not, we'll go back to the LZ. But it's just designated pads or just specific areas. Even if it's not a pad, it's like it's a parking lot here or a grass field over here that fire is already aware of. It's already set up. They know the area. We already know the area. We have them in our phones downloaded we have our Metro app is what we call it. And we have all of those downloaded our pre-designated ones. So we can if it's somewhere we haven't been in a while, we can look at it and be like, oh yeah, there's a tree here. There's wires running this way and that way. Just to familiarize ourselves with it. So it's definitely a lot safer to use it.
To shift gears for a second, did you have any mentors in your career? And I know that you mentioned the nurse that came and spoke when you were in high school, but was there anybody through your nursing school or anybody that when you first got in there that kind of took you under their wing and you learned a lot from?
I feel like there were so many, honestly. Like my preceptors when I was in baby fresh nurse, I have Amber Knox. She was my preceptor from the time I was a capstone student until I was done with my orientation in the ICU. She was a big help. All of my friends, honestly, were very supportive of my goal. Once I got into flight and I was doing that SOAR program, it was actually one of the pilots, Jason Preston, and then Matt Benson, which is one of the safety officers and one of the base leads, that kind of were like, yeah, you really need to apply and kind of push me to. But pretty much everyone I came into contact with at Lifeline was very supportive and was like, yeah, just do this. You'll get there, keep applying. Don't, get, caught up in what's going on. Just, you can do it. Just keep going.
That parlays into a question that I always like to ask. And is what kind of personality does well, because it sounds like these people saw something in you. Like, you're obviously a go-getter. You wanted it. You're going to achieve it. And I think they saw that in you, and that's the kind of person that they want to work with. But what types of people do most of the folks that you work with? Are they extroverted? Are they introverted? Are they mechanically
I feel like most
inclined?
of them are pretty extroverted.
Okay.
I think we all are the kind of people that we don't know everything, and we know we don't know everything, but we know who to ask. We know where to look. But I think one of the biggest things is never feeling like you're going to know everything. You're never going to know everything. There's always going to be something to learn. There's always going to be something that you don't know how to do or you haven't done a lot. So I think not having that level of arrogance that sometimes comes with the title of flight nurse, not getting to that point is, I think, one of the most important things, because you have to work as a team too. You know, being able to work as a team member. There's that fine line of being arrogant versus being like confident. You have to be confident in your abilities. And I think that's some reasons why I struggled a little bit in the beginning was I just wasn't confident. And they're always like, you know what you're doing. Like, you have the right things. You're saying the right stuff. You're doing the right things. You just need to commit to it. So I think finding that balance of like, yes, I know what I'm doing, but I know when I don't know what I'm doing, and not being afraid to admit that.
That is an extremely fine line to walk between confidence and arrogance. And the minute you get on the arrogant side, life has a way of knocking you down. Yes, absolutely. And it's usually really uncomfortable. So it's better if you just stay humble as your default mode. But what types of soft skills do folks that succeed in your line of work, what do you see in your counterparts that separate them from the other competition?
I think empathy is you have to be you have to be able to see from the patient side of things too. Just having that feeling, it makes for the patient, it makes them feel better too.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest things I've seen in all my partners. They've all flown for years. They're all super smart. They're good teachers. But I think, staying calm and knowing how to talk to a patient are some of the big soft skills.
Are a lot of your coworkers, or is people that get into your line of work, are they kind of adrenaline junkies a little bit? It seems like I think we all are. Yeah.
At least a little bit to some degree. We all enjoy that,
it's a rush.
High stress situation. Yeah. The rush that you get from it.
Yeah. What's your advice for someone if they fail, if they make a mistake? How do you best respond to that?
Learn from it. And I will tell you right now, I've made my fair share of mistakes. You learn from it. And it's hard. I'm a perfectionist. That's one of my biggest strengths and my weaknesses at the same time. I want to be perfect every single time, the first time. And that's just not realistic. I've missed tubes and I beat myself up about it, but that's not going to make you better. What's going to make you better is, why did I miss that tube? What can I do to make the next tube not fail? And you have to look at it too. When you do fail, 99% of the time, the patient didn't have harm. It's still, the patient was fine. The situation was fine.
Yeah.
Just learn from it. And
what do you like most about your job?
Oh,
can you narrow it down to just maybe one or two things?
Yeah, I think I like the environment of, you're always learning something. There's always something new to learn. There's new protocols coming out. I like that constantly changing environment as far as that goes. And I like that every day is different. No 2 days are the same. So there's none of the monotony, sitting around doing the same thing.
What do you dislike most about your job?
Definitely losing patients. We see the sickest of the sick, and sometimes you just can't save them. And that really sucks, especially when you've got, kiddos and babies and, people that are the same age of your mom and your dad and your sister. It's, you can make things personal, and that really hurts. And then also those, 2 a.m. calls when you're dead asleep and the tones drop and you're like, dang it.
Right.
Sleeping real good.
I can relate to that. Yeah. It's always when you're really, really deep in sleep is when the tones are going to drop. So that's when you lose somebody, that can't be easy. And that's what a lot of people don't realize about the first responders is that you have to kind of put up a wall a little bit. There's a mental health aspect to this line of work, and I don't want to go down a huge rabbit hole, but you want to maintain empathy and understanding, but you also have to kind of provide a little bit of self-isolation or protectionism. You cannot get emotionally wrapped up in every patient or you won't last. And so, yeah, that's a tough situation to be in. I don't think sometimes the folks looking in realize what folks like you go through, and you're absolutely, you're just the front line. I've only had a handful of calls in my whole life. When I was out in Colorado, we were kind of remote for the fire department that I worked at, and we'd have folks land on the highway or out in a huge field. And when you see life flight, the folks that are getting on that chopper are not doing well. It's not, I broke a finger or I have a headache. It's you're in a bad way. And it's kind of like being in the emergency room. The longer you wait, the better it is, because you don't want to be rushed in the emergency room. That means something's gone really wrong. So I tip my hat to all the folks in your line of work. I'm not a big fan of flying anyway, so I don't think I could concentrate enough bouncing around up there to do anything but vomit. So
yeah.
Let's talk about pay for a second. Now, I'm not asking you what you make, but is there a general salary scale for a flight nurse?
I would say, because we're out.
Right.
I would say probably you would start off somewhere between like 30 and 35 an hour, somewhere between there. It really, really depends, because I started brand new. Like I was a very new, very fresh. It depends on your amount of experience, because they do take that into account at most places. How many years of experience have you flown before? Or how many years have you been a nurse? Did you wait 10 years before doing this? They take all of that stuff into consideration as far as your pay. So I think for me, I might have been on like the lower end of it, but I think some people get the misconception that you get paid more to do this job because of the risk, and you don't. I make probably actually a little bit less doing flying than I do, because I still work in the ICU as well, just because I've been in the ICU for 5 years. So you don't make any more, but you have a lot more fun.
Well, yeah, you get paid in different ways. I'm sure that's you have a full benefits package, and you're okay. And the longer you work, obviously your pay is just going to keep climbing the more experience you get. Okay. Is there any other, and I think I already know the answer to this question because you wanted to do this since you were little, but was there any other career that kind of caught your eye for a little bit and you thought, well, maybe I might want to look into that?
No. Absolutely not. No. I've just always been like one track mind.
Have you ever considered getting your pilot's license or going that route?
Well, I probably not. No. I don't know. I mean, I see what they do, and I know they say the same thing about my job, but I look at that and I'm like, I could never do that. I could never look at those switches and know exactly what they do and which ones to. I mean, I could put an RNAV approach into an airport and land us safely somewhat safely at least, if the pilot were to become incapacitated. But that's about as far as it gets.
When I was growing up, it seemed like all of the pilots that did the, the morning traffic and stuff on the radio, they were all former military from Vietnam. I think I'm older than you by quite a bit, but the only guys that had the hours were the pilots that had been in the military. Most of the pilots now in that same kind of situation, former military?
Yes, I think most of ours are, at least at our base, they're all military, but one of them, good old Curtis Thesson, shout out to him. He's been doing this for longer than I've been alive, probably twice as long as I've been alive. With Metro alone, I think he's been there as long as I've been alive. So he is the only one that was civilian first. But most of the time, you're absolutely right. They don't have the amount of hours in an aircraft, especially the amount that you need in a helicopter.
Right.
Most of them have to be military prior.
Have you seen any, well, let me rephrase the question. What is coming as far as the technological advances? Because I can see in your specific circumstance, you're going to be on the front lines of getting faster, smaller, lighter equipment. Weight is a huge part of what you have to do. Are you seeing things like carbon fiber and stuff enter the picture, or?
They're somewhat. And I know that's something that the pilots talk about every year at their end of the year meeting is what can we do to make this thing lighter so it flies faster?
Right.
Because there's really, as technology advances, we're just adding more stuff onto the aircraft. So we're not getting rid of anything. So we're trying to make things smaller and lighter. We did get a new blood warmer that's a lot smaller and a lot lighter. But, there's the medications, your fluids obviously are a little heavy, but like your medications don't weigh that much. So when we add that kind of stuff on there, it's not that big of a deal. But, our new vents were a lot heavier. We got the new Hamilton vents, and those are a lot heavier than those old vents are. So it's kind of trying to find that balance of like, okay, which equipment pieces are we going to use? Which ones aren't we going to use? There are some stuff that, like our high flow nasal cannula set, we don't keep that on the aircraft all the time. We just do it if we know prior to that the patient is going to be on it.
Okay.
So there are some things like that. Just because if we're not going to use it all the time, then why have it on there weighing us down?
I can see not only for speed, but also for economical reasons, you would use less fuel if if the airplane or the chopper is lighter.
So. Yep, you're absolutely correct.
What is the scariest thing that you've ever experienced? Have you ever had any close calls, or you wondered, are we going to make it through this, or you had any kind of a horror story?
Honestly, knock on some wood. Especially with everything going on, I've not had any close encounters. We had one call where we were sitting on a helipad while we were at the hospital for a little bit, and it was pouring down rain because we can fly in the rain. It just can't be lightning, thundering, that kind of stuff. But so it was pouring rain, but we could see well. We had good enough viz because we're also an IFR aircraft, so we can fly in the clouds.
Oh,
so we don't. Yeah, so we're the only aircraft in the area that does that. I think AirVac maybe has one that does, but that's beside the point. So the mechanics, they don't like to get wet. The electronics don't. Kind of a weird thought, but there are some parts in there, especially because they've been sitting there for a while, that the rain had kind of seeped in on it. So when we lifted, I hear the pilot, because we're both in the back and the pilot's up front, and there's curtains in between, and I just hear him say, "I need you to grab the book." And I was like the book. We have this book on the aircraft that flips through all of the safety shutdown procedures, and if you get this chip light, you do these procedures. And I was like, "Oh, you mean like
the oh crap book?"
He was like, "Yeah." He was like, "Yeah, pull it out." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I'm flipping through, telling him, and it was just a simple chip light. It wasn't anything huge. It's not something that we needed to land immediately. It was something that you can continue and land and have somebody come look at it. So he did. That was the only time that I was like, "Oh man, is this like an issue? Like, are we gonna have to find a field to land in with this patient on board?" But it was just him being overly precautious. He just wanted to make sure. And if they do that with any kind of light they get, they flip through and make sure that they know. They try to do things to fix it if they can before either landing right now or as soon as practicable, like finding an airport or somewhere to land, or if it's something that they can continue on and get it fixed later. So I think that's really the only time that I've been like, "Oh, are we going to land now?" Or
that's a little bit of
it wasn't
pucker factor
noises, and it wasn't, losing altitude really quickly. It wasn't anything scary. It was just like, "Hey, you need to pull the book out." And I was like, "Oh no."
Yeah, if you see sparking and stuff, that's a pucker factor that, my goodness, that would be scary. What elevation do you typically fly at?
We like to fly around 2,000 or above. Somewhere between 2,000 and 3,500 is pretty typical for us. It kind of depends. We don't really like to fly much lower than 2,000, maybe 1,700, maybe. So when you're in Springfield, you have to fly under 2,000 because of the restricted areas, because of the airport. But once you get out of that restricted area, we go right up to 2,000, 2,500, somewhere around there. So like while you're in Springfield city limits, we're about 17, 18, I think. I'm not 100% sure on that. But then we fly up, we can go up to 10,000. So we can do 10,000 for, I think it's 10 minutes at a time, something like that. Again, don't quote me. I'm still learning all this stuff. But only for a certain period of time. Then you have to drop back down below 10,000.
I'd imagine it gets a little chilly up that high.
It definitely does.
Yeah. What speed do you typically fly at?
It depends on the wind. If we have a nice tailwind, we can fly. I think the fastest I've flown is like 170 across the ground. So roughly
That's moving.
Yeah. So like 180 miles per hour, somewhere around there.
Whew. I didn't realize they flew that fast.
Yeah. Typically 120, I would say. But I mean, there's been times when we've been, horse and buggy could have passed us. We felt like we're going like 80 across the ground coming back from St. Louis usually is when that happens.
Do you ever, and maybe this is just the pilot, but do you ever have to use night vision or thermal imaging or anything if you're doing anything at night?
So,
okay.
Yeah. So per Metro, so we always on the dead leg, so the leg where there's no patient, one of us sits up front and the other person's in the back. So one of us sits up with the pilot. If you're up front and it's dark out, you have to have NVGs on.
What is it that are you basically a spotter for the pilot, or are you focusing more on where the patient's at, or all of the above?
So kind of all of the above. We're looking, like if we were landing on scene with the NVGs, we'd be looking for any obstructions. We'd be trying to look for those wires, things like that, looking for open areas to land. But we're just a second set of eyes, looking out. If it's just a dead leg and we don't have anybody on board, we're just heading back home. We're looking out for birds, things like that. Other aircraft, that's a big thing. Whether NVGs are on or not, you're looking for birds and you're looking for other aircraft.
Are birds, you always hear about an airliner will hit a duck or a goose or something and it just runs. I would imagine your blades would just, not to be gross, but would just chop up a bird. Is it really that big of a...
Depends on where it hits. It really does. So if it hits, typically like when we hit them, it usually ends up going underneath. Because we hit it, we see them in time, just in time. We've had one bird strike, I think, that went through the bottom of what we call the chin bubble. So we're just on the bottom where the glass is, and it came through the glass. I think that's the only time we've ever had a bird strike that was like a problem. We hit one last week, and it hit the bottom of the skid, and just like, you could see feathers everywhere when we landed. You could. I bet
that was loud.
I was like, oh my gosh, what was that? And I thought, that was a bird.
That has to die. That has to be kind of scary though when you're up there and all of a sudden
it is, especially when it's dark and you're like,
oh, good grief. My goodness.
But no, it really depends on where it hits. Obviously, if it gets in your engine, because they can get up there too, that's not good.
Right.
I've never had one hit the blade. I would imagine that it would, like you said, it probably would chop it up pretty good. Those blades are moving real fast.
Yeah.
But if it hits the fenestron, that's not good. Anything that hits the fenestron in the back is going to probably take us out, unfortunately. But we do have two engines. So if one engine fails for some reason, we have a second one that we can land on. So
is the second one just kind of like an emergency backup where, we need to land now? Or
we fly with two engines on all the time.
Okay.
So,
I didn't realize that.
We only have one transmission though. So if the transmission goes, then we're still not good.
This has been really fun. I'm sure I could think of a million other questions, but I just don't want to just pepper you like, 20 questions. But I really appreciate you taking the time. This has been a career that I had on the list when I first started this podcast. I had a flight nurse or flight medic was on that list of people that I absolutely wanted to interview, and you have represented your career very well.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad I could help you mark that off your list.
Yeah. And I hope anybody listening, this sounds like a really cool job. If I could go back, I might choose a different path besides the fire service, because I'm kind of jealous about what you get to do. It sounds fun.
So,
yeah. Thanks a lot, Terry. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And that wraps up another episode of the Jobs Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hopefully you found that interesting. As always, I wait until the end of an interview to ask you to like, subscribe, and share. I feel it's important that I earn that support from you. Thanks again, and we will see you on the next one.